3 months into our marriage, my sickly husband's first love showed up at our door. I was just about to sensibly suggest a divorce when I saw my weak husband, who couldn't care for himself, suddenly kick his wheelchair aside and wave his cane around fiercely. Get lost. You're just jealous I have a wife. Jasmine, we need to talk. I had just handed in my resignation when Tim blocked me at the company entrance. He looked haggard and his eyes were filled with emotion, like he wasn't the one who got caught cheating back then. I dropped my gaze and fiddled with the diamond ring on my finger. There's nothing to talk about, I said. Tim's eyes locked onto my hand, his expression stiffening with disbelief. You really got married? No way, I don't believe it. In a panic, he grabbed my wrist. The next second, a voice quietly floated over, maybe I shouldn't have come. I turned to the sound and saw my husband Richard. His hair was black, his complexion fair. He looked like a cool ink painting, with bright roses in his arms adding a pop of color to him. Right now, he stood there with a pale face, looking at us with a forlorn gaze. The old butler behind him, who was pushing his wheelchair, sighed heavily. Richard, Jasmine made a mistake every woman makes. Enough, Richard said with deep understanding, bitterly closing his eyes. Us men should be tolerant, learn to turn a blind eye. As he spoke, his wheelchair rolled to a stop right in front of us. Tim snapped out of it, his gaze skimmed over Richard's wheelchair, a sneer appearing on his lips. Jasmine, this is the invalid you settled for. Richard just held his chest, forcing a brave smile my way. Jasmine, it's okay to taste some simple fare every now and then. His gaze dropped, staring hard at my hand, as he seemed to nonchalantly say, after all, they're just hotels. I'm your home. Don't get the wrong idea. I realized Tim was still holding my hand and quickly pulled away, feeling guilty. A hint of hurt appeared on Tim's face. Jasmine. Richard looked down sadly, his long fingers slowly wrapped around his cane. Sorry. I just wanted to bring Jasmine some freshly bloomed roses. I shouldn't have disturbed you. I'll leave now. My heart softened and I quickly took the flowers from his hand, then coldly told Tim one word, leave. Tim's smile vanished. He pointed at Richard, filled with frustration. Jasmine, can't you see? At his outburst, Richard coughed weakly, and both the old butler and I shot accusatory looks his way. With a wronged face, Tim went silent. I noticed Richard's unusual pallor then. Why do you look so pale today? Worried, I touched his face, my fingers brushing against powder. What's this? I wondered, rubbing my fingers together. Richard's brows twitched, and he seemed a tad nervous. Jasmine, the old butler quickly jumped in, tears streaming down his face. He was in such a hurry leaving. He accidentally knocked into a wall and got some dust on him. In my mind's eye, I saw Richard stumbling out to meet me, and my heart overflowed with tenderness, growing even more averse to Tim. Don't show up in front of us again, I declared coldly. You'll see, Tim shouted, with a spiteful look pointed at Richard. I'll make sure Jasmine sees the real you. With those words, he slunk away out of sight. On the way home, Richard didn't ask a thing. Watching his quiet profile, unsaid guilt spread within me. My marriage with Richard was the result of an unexpected twist. As the family outcast, I was married off to Richard, who was paralyzed from the waist down, to bring him good fortune. Rumor had it he was violent and indifferent. Yet what I saw was a guy in a wheelchair, coughing every few steps, clearly delicate like a white flower. What's up? He suddenly turned his head, catching my long staring gaze. I remembered what the old butler said earlier and hesitated before touching his face lightly. Is your face all right? It's nothing, he just worries too much. He nuzzled my hand, the soft touch fleeting. My face heated up, and I quickly drew my hand back, like I was burned. This guy, he's too trusting. No wonder he gets pushed around. Even after washing up at night, I was still concerned about this. Lost in thought, I turned and found someone extra on the bed. Richard lay on his side, in his partly open pajamas, pale face tinged with blush, eyes dreamy. Jasmine, let's sleep together tonight. Since our marriage, out of concern for his health, we'd never really been a couple. My voice tightened. What do you mean? Weren't you saving yourself for your first love? What? Confusion flashed across Richard's face. I was stunned. Before the wedding, Richard had approached me and talked me into this alliance. Back then, reeling from a breakup, he convinced me. To be honest, I too had someone I couldn't have, but she. He hesitated, ending with a bitter smile. We're just two people who fell short, comforting each other. Probably that line moved me. I accepted the marriage, no longer resisting. After marrying, we got along well, becoming that admired couple in our circle. Then, Richard seemed to remember. You meant that. He paused, flashing a harmless smile. Jasmine, you misunderstood. Ken said there's a thunderstorm tonight. I thought I'd keep you company. He patted the bed, gesturing for me to lie down, You don't think I'm up to something, do you? I never hold grudges against those who hurt me, let alone you. I nodded quietly, pulling the blanket over myself beside him, the faint cool scent of wood seeping into my nose. I couldn't help but sniff. Indeed, even though Richard isn't in great health, he's kind and never holds a grudge. For example, I don't remember your ex calling you for exactly 5 minutes and 35 seconds, saying 6.5 things, and challenging me 4 times. He added matter-of-factly, I'm a mature and composed man. I don't get jealous easily and never argue with kids like that. I certainly won't still be upset about it decades later in my grave. I only get up every sleepless night to water your favorite roses in silence. I could almost smell a hint of jealousy, and looked at him in surprise. I'm sorry. I'm just really insecure, Richard admitted, his eyes dropping dejectedly. He's so capable, unlike me. I thought of the upcoming party in a few days, where I'd probably meet those who mock me again. When he looked up again, his eyes were glistening with tears. I wonder if there will be any kind-hearted people like you to protect me there. Without thinking, I reached out and smoothed his furrowed brow. Have you been bullied again? If Ken hadn't let it slip last time, I'd never have known. He just blinked, not saying a word. Don't hide things from me anymore. I softened and promised, don't worry, I'll go with you. Richard's eyes lit up with gratitude, and he hugged me tightly. Really, Jasmine, you're the best. His warm skin made my heart race. I wondered how anyone as stone-hearted as a first love could treat him indifferently. Why did I agree inexplicably that day? Even as I pushed Richard into the party, I hadn't fully come to grips with everything. Suddenly, a stranger's booming voice echoed, Richard, when did you get a limp? I had no idea. I looked toward the voice and saw an unfamiliar man spray his drink out in shock as he stared at us. Without realizing it, I glanced down at Richard's legs. Do you know him? He smiled brightly like a sunflower and reached out his hand to me. Hi, I'm his enemy. Richard promptly cut off, unwavering. He's one of my arch-enemies, Steve. Missed one. He seemed to mutter under his breath before raising his voice. See, business has no real friends. Steve's lips twitched as he retracted his hand. I've had a handicap for so long without him caring. And now he throws jabs at me in front of my wife, as soon as he's back in the country. He slumped back, secretly glancing at me from the corner of his eye. Malicious? Absolutely malicious. That's too much. I found myself siding with him, though still suspicious. Is the armrest on your wheelchair cracked? Richard looked momentarily blank, then sighed heavily. I bet an enemy sabotaged it to harm me. He gazed at me with starry eyes. Jasmine, you're so observant. You saved me again. Oddly enough, whenever we stepped out together, Richard always seemed to run into some mishap. He had quite a few enemies, apparently. Slightly embarrassed by the praise, I coughed. It's nothing. These business tricks are downright low. Exactly, shameless. Richard chimed in, standing nearby. Steve rolled his eyes and suddenly made a suspicious noise. Richard gripped his cane suddenly, visibly fed up. I looked curiously at Steve, who rubbed his belly affectionately. Nothing much. Just 3 months along. This guy's humor was something else. I needed an escape from this strange vibe. I'm going to the restroom. After dawdling in the bathroom, I came out to hear Richard seemingly warning Steve about something. Don't start any nonsense in front of her, or else. Noticing me, Richard changed his tone proudly. Or even if I'm not able-bodied, my wife will protect me. Steve looked at me expressionlessly, then Richard, seeming to have another bout of morning sickness. Richard, gritting his teeth, was about to speak when his face suddenly changed. Jasmine. He lunged from his wheelchair, pulling me securely underneath him. Amidst gasps, a chandelier crashed down nearby. Luckily, it rolled away in one piece. A close call, but no harm done. Ignoring the concerned voices around us, Richard checked me over urgently. Are you okay? Hurt anywhere? I met his gaze, then slowly asked, your leg. Before he could answer, Richard hesitated, then suddenly tilted his head, eyes closing as he fainted in my arms. Amidst the ensuing chaos, he ended up admitted to his family's private hospital. Despite only injuring his arm slightly, he'd been unconscious ever since. After recounting the events, I looked guiltily at the old butler who'd hurried over. I'm sorry. I didn't take care of him. Young couples always face some hurdles. The butler smiled warmly. Besides, isn't he awake now? Awake? I turned quickly to find Richard sneakily watching. Scenes flashed through my mind as I eyed his leg. Your leg. Richard fluttered his lashes, seemingly uneasy, but decided, actually, I understand. The butler cut in, suddenly enlightened, and affectionately slapped Richard's shoulder. It's a miracle of love. Richard jolted from the impact. Whatever he meant to say, swallowed back. Curious, I leaned in. Richard, what were you about to say? The old butler, teary-eyed, captured my attention again. In the heat of the moment, The young master overcame his issues to protect you. You really are his lucky charm. The doctors standing nearby nodded like bobbleheads. Exactly, exactly. It's a medical miracle. I opened my mouth, but they raised their hands and started clapping enthusiastically. A match made in heaven, truly. I turned to Richard. Did you just? His fingers nervously dug at the bedsheet like he wished it would swallow him whole. Yeah, that's what I meant. This whole situation seemed off. Richard watched my expression nervously, trying to prop himself up. Ken, I don't trust this place. We should switch hospitals. The old butler reached out in dismay. You forgot. The hospitals outside are your enemy's territory. He was anguished, practically beating his chest. You're walking into a trap. I jumped in to persuade. Let's not be hasty. It's safer here with our people. Hearing Jasmine agree, Richard quickly slid back under the covers, obediently looking at me. All right. I trust you. Soon, our enthusiastic folks had Richard's legs and arms wrapped up like a mummy. Ken magically pulled out a pot of porridge. Richard's arms are not quite functional. Would you mind helping him? How could we let Jasmine do that? Before I could pitch in, the freshly mummified Richard softly grumbled. What are you saying? Don't trouble Jasmine so much. From his spot in the bed, peeking out like a forlorn puppy, he looked at me. I just have a bum leg and a busted arm, and I've been through a shock. I'm not completely helpless. I grabbed the porridge. Forget it. I'll feed you. Once I said that, everyone else in the room quickly scooted out, gently closing the door behind them. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling of being duped. As I reluctantly picked up the spoon and fed him a few bites, Richard looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. I suddenly realized my hand had soothingly landed on his head. Seeing his hopeful eyes, I felt embarrassed for some reason, and whispered his name. Richard. I'm here. Richard's eyes crinkled with a heat that made my face flush. I fanned myself with a hand, blaming the AC for being too high. Then, the butler's face peeked in through the door, looking like it had something unsaid. You have a visitor. Before he finished, a pink whirlwind blew past me straight towards Richard. Her voice was sweet and intimate. Richard, I'm back. Who are you? Stay away. Richard quickly grabbed his blanket, hiding himself defensively. Before I could say anything, he turned to me with exasperation. Jasmine. I didn't show anything. She came onto me first. Richard, what's the matter? The woman seemed a bit taken aback, tugging on a smile. It's Vivian. Richard looked puzzled. Are we really that close? Her eyes glistened a little, turning red. Are you still mad at me? She looked at him with genuine emotion. Back then, I had no choice, really. Sensing the tension, I picked up the bowl. I'll wash this, you two talk. Richard wiggled anxiously on the bed, sounding a bit urgent. Wait, I'll have them sorted inside. The weather's getting chillier. I stared blankly at my reflection in the mirror, letting cold water run through my fingers. Thoughts about the vibrant young face earlier flitted through my mind. Or maybe nothing did. Really. Returning to the hospital room, I saw a familiar figure suspiciously pressing their ear against the door. Tim, what are you doing here? My eyes focused on the broom in his hand, and I understood. New job. Tim jumped nervously, eyes darting around. I'm just here to, experience life. My hand subconsciously moved toward my phone, stalking. Wait, I've got something important. I found out your husband's secret. He's a total fraud. He clamped a hand over his mouth immediately after, glancing guiltily at the door. Got in here with some effort, you know. Tim sighed in relief, speaking in a hushed tone. He's not actually lame. I saw him kick a thief 3 meters away. He hastily pulled out some blurry photos. The man in them looked strong, kicking a thief out like it was nothing. I glanced at the pictures, then at him. Without a word, I gestured toward the door. I'm not leaving. Don't believe me? I'll call out that wannabe and get proof. He shouted angrily, and before I could react, he pushed the door wide open. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating Richard, wrapped like a mummy. The beautiful woman was nowhere to be seen. Richard looked up quickly at the commotion, his gaze falling on Tim and then dimming. Jasmine, isn't this the same person from before? He pursed his lips. I noticed the faint hurt in his pretty eyes, felt a prick in my heart, and rounded on Tim. Does it look like him? Does it? Tim's voice wavered, sounding unsure himself. He clenched his jaw, thrusting his phone at Richard. Tell me, isn't this you? Why's this person wearing jeans? Can't be me. I only wear what Jasmine likes, suits. Richard's voice was weak, wrinkling his nose at the photo. It was true. From the moment I met Richard, he always wore suits. Even when watering roses by the window in the blazing sun, he donned his suit. Tim stubbornly opened his mouth, looking like he wanted to say something, but Richard coughed weakly at just the right moment. I hurried over, patting his back and digging out his usual meds. If you're done, get out. Don't disturb the patient. Wait, what medication is this? The next second, Tim's hand shot over, snatching the meds away. I glared at him. Are you out of your mind? Tim suspiciously licked it and then suddenly brightened up, confidently claiming, this isn't medicine, it's candy. I was taken aback. Richard's eyes flashed briefly, and he quickly turned to me with an earnest apology. Jasmine, I'm sorry. I'm really just a useless guy. I asked them to add sugar, because I'm afraid of bitterness. He raised his neck in a fragile arc, pitifully looking up at me. Do you think less of me now? My heart softened, and I quickly reassured him, of course not. Liking sweets is normal, everyone likes them. Tim shook his arms in disgust. Jasmine, don't buy this nonsense. He angrily shoved the medicine in my face. I swear it's sugar. If you don't believe me, try it yourself. At that moment, Richard adjusted his shirt collar, revealing a beautifully delicate collarbone as if feeling a bit hot. No need, I believe him. I was fixated on the unintentional reveal of the collarbone and blurted out, he's different from you. Tim's face turned stormy. Seriously, just because I'm not as good at acting. Knock it off with that nonsense. Don't slander people. I scolded him seriously, then sighed. Richard's just pure and gentle, unlike your deceitful self. Richard cooperated by giving an innocent, harmless look. Fine, Jasmine. Tim punched the bed railing hard, exasperatedly throwing out a few words. You're something else. Just wait to get deceived. I'm done with you. The door slammed shut with a bang. I fumed. He's the one lying all the time, and now he's turning it around on me. Right, Richard. Usually, Richard liked to agree with me, but this time he hesitated. I poked him on the shoulder, feeling oddly hurt. Richard, why aren't you helping me out? His voice was dry. I am not the type to pick fights. Still, he paused. You're right. For some reason, his tone carried a hint of disillusionment. Indeed a scoundrel. He cursed intensely, full of lies, completely shameless. Don't need to be that harsh. But for someone as gentle as him being forced to curse, it's understandable he's lost track of the limits. I thought generously again. Before bed, I realized I'd forgotten to talk to Richard about that ex-girlfriend. I opened our chat and just typed a few words when a friend request popped up. Jasmine, hello, I'm Richard's friend, Vivian. Coming to my senses, I had already accepted her friend request. Vivian sent over a cute emoji. Thank you for taking care of him lately. She didn't specify a name, but we both knew who him referred to. No need to trouble you anymore. That's Richard's wish too. I didn't reply and turned off the screen. With the curtains tightly closed, I couldn't see the vast sea of roses outside. Inside, the only light source came from the rose-shaped bedside lamp. Richard gifted me that not long after our marriage. I have no idea how he found out I liked roses. I still remember he clumsily put it together over half a month, and the final product barely resembled the picture. He blushed, trying to throw it out secretly, but I kept it. It's ugly cute, and after looking at it for a while, it kind of grows on you. Vivian's rose-like beautiful face crossed my mind as I flicked the lamp's shade hard. Scoundrel. The next morning, I pushed open Richard's hospital room door right on time. Richard, I brought. Looking for Richard. He's gone for a med change. Vivian lounged on the sofa, idly twiddling her shiny nails without lifting her gaze. I set down the porridge. I'll wait for him to return. Miss Jasmine, didn't I tell you yesterday? She frowned with annoyance, sitting upright, and watched me with a superior gaze. What's mine can be yours temporarily, no big deal. But now, her tone lowered, I'm back. So it's time to return it to its rightful owner. I calmly retorted, Miss Vivian, are you planning to interfere with our marriage? Vivian chuckled slyly, Miss Jasmine, things you steal will never truly be yours. You aren't reluctant, are you? I sat at the other end of the sofa. Miss Vivian, do I sense you're in a hurry to chase me away? Afraid Richard might walk in on us. Her face darkened. You, Jasmine, you're here. The door suddenly opened from outside, revealing Richard peeking in. I stayed up late and made something yesterday. Richard, Vivian quickly greeted him warmly. Why are you back again? Richard only noticed her then, instantly recoiling back into the wheelchair, startled. His suspicious eyes darted between us. What were you two talking about? Vivian shot me a warning look, then smiled. Miss Jasmine and I got on so well, we were chatting about your childhood antics. She winked playfully. After all, we've known each other so many years, almost like childhood sweethearts. A vein throbbed in Richard's temple. Meeting my gaze, he took a deep breath, wearing the same gentle, harmless smile as always. Only the voice seemed squeezed through his teeth. Miss Vivian, that's a joke. I've only seen you a few times, unworthy of such titles. Vivian brushed back her hanging hair, her smile blooming beautifully. Richard, you're still shy so easily. She waggled her hand. I then noticed she somehow had a jewelry box. The deep blue box was edged with tiny diamonds, like stars on a summer night. I'd seen it earlier. Is this the gift you specially prepared for me? She opened the box presumptively. A rose brooch. Thank you. You liar. Richard suddenly stood up, lividly kicking the wheelchair away. This brooch is for my wife. I almost choked on my saliva. Vivian, even more startled, hurriedly tossed away the box, eyes wide in panic. You. What you? Richard finally snapped, charging through the door and swinging his cane at her face. Are we even close? You're just jealous I've got a wife. The screen seemed to freeze for a moment. The next second, Richard came back to his senses and turned his head to look at me with a flash of panic in his eyes. So heavy, he exclaimed exaggeratedly, loosening his grip, and the cane fell to the ground with a thud. Then, as if drained of all strength, he staggered forward a few steps and collapsed onto the hospital bed. After a few seconds, he sneakily pulled the blanket up, leaving only his dark eyes visible, staring at me unblinkingly. He still looked pitiful, helpless, and weak. Just as I was about to speak, Vivian beat me to it. She glared with wide eyes, raised long nails, pointed at Richard, then at me. I get it, Richard. Is it possible that I'm just a part of you and your wife's game? She snorted, playing some lame disabled big shot and little wife role play. Boring, childish, disgusting. If it weren't for the old man hearing you were out of it and letting me in, I would never look at you, you creep. She grabbed her bag and stomped out, heels clicking loudly, slamming the door with a bang that reverberated throughout the room. Richard and I exchanged glances. After a while, he pulled the blanket down a bit, showing a pleading smile. Without saying a word, I bent down to pick up the cane, weighing it in my hand with an angry grin. Quite heavy. Richard, care to explain? Richard's eyes darted shiftily as he mumbled to himself. Something's not right. Why do I see double? Maybe I should. No passing out. I immediately gritted my teeth to stop him from his usual trick. He stared back at me blankly for a few seconds. I lifted the cane threateningly, still acting. Richard glanced at it, shivering. I'll fess up, Jasmine. Listen, I wasn't limping. That was fake. I remembered Tim's words. The medicine in the bottle. It's candy. He winced, holding his cheek. My wisdom teeth are inflamed. I stared at his pale face. But your complexion. He rubbed his hand on his face, revealing a healthy flush underneath. I get up early and wear foundation. He glanced at me cautiously. I use eye drops too. Feeling a bit muddled. Maybe you should get a checkup. Jasmine. Richard's eyes widened, a flash of red around them. Please, don't say it. He seemed to misunderstand something. I attempted to explain. I meant, just give me a few days, he whispered, burying his head in the blanket, sounding choked. My birthday's coming soon. Can everything wait a few days? It could be my birthday present. Then he softly added, Jasmine, don't look at me. I'm a mess right now. I looked at his fluffy head. Okay. After confessing that day, Richard managed to sneak out of the hospital when I wasn't looking. He didn't dare return home for several days. Seeing his birthday approaching, I opened my chat with Steve. After last time's party, he helped get Richard to the hospital, and we added each other as friends. Steve, do you know what Richard likes? Likes you, he replied before quickly adding more words to be given. Despite the complicated feeling, I still bought Richard a birthday gift and placed it neatly on the living room table. Yet, Richard remained out of sight every day. However, the day before his birthday, the gift I left on the table disappeared. On his birthday, Steve sent me a location. I pushed open the door and immediately saw Richard. After being away for days, he looked just like a withered grass. Even though he was the main character, he was stashed away in the corner of the booth, looking quite down. Seeing me come in, Steve nudged him. Richard looked up, brightened up, and grabbed some napkins to frantically clean the chairs beside him. Saved this spot for you. Steve waved me over. Richard pretended not to care, adjusting his tie and sitting up properly. No need, I'll sit here. I waved off the offer, decisively sitting as far from him as possible. What's going on with you two? Steve looked between us, thoughtfully miming a zipper across his lips. Richard picked up the bottle in front of him and took a big gulp. Throughout the event, whether I was chatting, on my phone, or sipping my drink, I could feel a mournful gaze following me. But each time I looked back, Richard was either deliberately avoiding looking at me or chugging his drink. I pretended not to notice until I heard some commotion from his direction. No way, you drank all that? One of the voices asked incredulously. Then Richard mumbled defiantly, no, I'm not drunk. His eyes had become dazed, as if a switch was flipped. I didn't know what someone said to him, but he proudly adjusted his tie, revealing a pair of cufflinks. They looked familiar. I remembered the missing gift box, feeling a sense of doom. As expected, he started chatting up the person next to him. Had enough. How did you know my wife gave me these cufflinks? Yeah, that project. It's just my wife's gift. Haven't been racing in a while. Yeah, we're doing great. I emotionlessly pulled my gaze away, deciding to act like I didn't know him. The night dragged on, and it wasn't clear how long passed before Steve came over, looking resigned. Could you do something about him? Someone confided in me that has repeated this cufflink tale like 20 times. By the time I dragged Richard, who was flaunting himself around like a butterfly, out of the party, the birthday bash was almost over. The car ride back was silent. Maybe I was tired from not sleeping well these past few days. So I dozed off against the car window. Half asleep, I felt something warm and wet on my cheek, like a silent goodbye. When I woke up, I was already in my bedroom. Next to me were a few sheets of paper along with a familiar dark blue jewelry box. I picked up the box, revealing a signed divorce agreement from Richard. Other than that, Richard left nothing behind. I heard he had flown abroad to start a new venture, and it might be a long time before we meet again. Should we keep it from the young master? Ken sighed beside my hospital bed, looking worried. If he finds out, he'll be frantic. Richard's only been gone a few days, and here I am with a stomach illness in the hospital. Filled with anger, I said, why tell him? He's the one who wants nothing to do with me. Furiously, I ripped the divorce papers into tiny pieces. That lying bastard. The old butler touched his chin thoughtfully. I understand. That night, a shadow sneaked into my hospital room. When it got to the bedside, I turned on the light and coldly stared at him. The bright light caught him off guard, freezing him like a startled deer. Richard, I said, half amused, half mad, reaching out to pinch his ear like I've wanted to for a while, you dare come back. Richard's gaze darted around, his blush reaching his neck. Jasmine, he almost groaned, calling my name softly. Steve, who had just entered, gagged and said sarcastically, thank you for rewarding him like that. I quickly let go like I got burned. Why are you still here? Richard glared at him angrily. Steve shrugged, stepping back toward the door. Okay. I'm just a driver. You two take your time. The door closed smoothly. So, aren't we supposed to split clean? I turned my head away, refusing to look at Richard. Jasmine, have you been crying? Richard asked nervously, reaching out carefully, as if to touch my eyes. His fingers curled up, just before they could touch me. Jasmine, I know everything you see in me is fake, he said, his eyes slightly red, but I've really liked you for a long time. He gently placed his hand on my leg, pain flashing in his eyes. Jasmine, Ken told me about your leg. My leg. I paused and then sneered, glancing at him sideways. Don't worry about me. Couples just fly away when trouble hits, so just let me fend for myself. Jasmine, even if you think I'm shameless or haunting you, I won't leave you like this. Richard rested his face lightly on my leg, his voice hoarse. I'll find the best doctors for you. If not, I'll stay with you as a cripple forever. A slight noise came from the door. Looking past Richard, I saw Ken peek from the slightly ajar door and wink before closing it with a smile. I looked down at Richard's face. In the days he was gone, I thought a lot. I remembered his serious facade, but also his flushed ears after kissing me. His sweet talk might have been fake, but the glow in his eyes when he saw me was real. What touched me wasn't him, but also him. Seeing the divorce papers, my first emotion wasn't anger at being deceived, but upset at him leaving after stirring my heart. At that moment, I understood. He was flawless. But did I never suspect him? In truth, I willingly trapped myself. But if I just forgave such deceit, wouldn't it seem like I hold no grudges? Jasmine, Richard's tears left faint marks on my pants. I don't want to divorce you, he said muffled. I'll be whoever you want me to be. Don't abandon me. I gently patted his head, giving him the same innocent smile. All right, it's a deal. Epilogue. Years into his marriage, Richard still remembers the day he fell for Jasmine. He returned to his alma mater for a lecture. Turning down the leader's company, he unknowingly walked to a grove. Suddenly, he heard a yelp, and a boy fell heavily at his feet. The next second, he saw Jasmine, cool and composed. She stood there, protecting a girl with tear-streaked eyes. If your mouth runs off again, I won't mind giving you another workout, she said. Seeing him blocking the way, Jasmine's gaze was cold. Do you need a workout too? No. Richard shook his head vigorously, quickly stepping aside. As they passed, he caught a faint scent of roses. She's so fierce. Richard watched her walk away, murmuring. Before Steve could comment, a thrill passed through him. I really like her. Back then, Steve was still his assistant. Listening to his boss, Jack shivered, clutching his stomach. Can men get pregnant? Why else would he feel so sick? Later, on another visit, Richard saw Jasmine on stage giving a speech. Curious, he did some digging, but found little. Jasmine wasn't well known at the school, but Richard thought she was dazzling. He'd seen her fearless when helping others, saw her spirited on stage, and here, doing volunteer work at a nursing home, he watched her listen intently to the elderly, eyes soft and gentle. Jasmine had a small mole by her eye. When she spoke, that tiny mole would sway, and it drove Richard a little crazy. Jasmine suddenly tilted her head, looking at him with confusion. Probably feeling like she recognized him, she gave him a rare, gentle smile. Have we met before? She actually started talking to him. Richard's heart was doing backflips, and he decided to kickstart his plan to win her over that very night. Steve threw cold water on his hopes, though. She's got a boyfriend already, the campus crush from the sports school next door. And the guy was young and full of energy. Richard's dreams fell apart like a dropped china plate. In a weird headspace, Richard went to check out Jasmine's so-called boyfriend. Not so impressive, he thought while eyeing Tim critically. Bad temper, smiles too much at other girls, definitely not genuine. Tim was only a bit older than them. Richard figured he had time to wait. 3 days after her breakup, Jasmine was drowning her sorrows with her bestie. Clenching her teeth, she muttered, "Men are only honest when they are hung up on the wall." Her friend, Tipsy, replied, "Spread the news, Jasmine likes guys who don't move an inch." A few days later, Richard rolled into the old family butler's site in a wheelchair, looking all different. He coughed weakly. "Ken, from today on, I'm a cripple." Richard made his move on Jasmine for the first time. He carefully drew her familiar face with his gaze, but Jasmine didn't seem to remember him. Silently, he greeted her in his mind. Long time no see. Jasmine, fresh from a breakup, was against the idea of marrying Richard. Good thing Richard had his story ready. "Not gonna lie," he said, "I had a crush I couldn't get to, but she..." Richard cut himself off, smiling bitterly. "We're just two lost souls trying to stay warm." False. He'd been planning this all along. Ken had watched Richard grow up, and was more than willing to go along with his schemes. With Ken's help, Richard didn't only have a fake private hospital full of actors, but also a styling team, to ensure he looked frail and weak in Jasmine's eyes. Oh, and that trusty suit, a staple to give off that mature, reliable man vibe. Perfect. The stylist had said this kind of attractive, strong yet tragic persona would definitely grip any girl's heart. But, the day-to-day relationship stuff, that's all up to the young master. As the old butler patted his shoulder lovingly, Richard nodded confidently. Jasmine preferred the gentle, soft-hearted types. Lucky for him, that was exactly his shtick. Richard shamelessly though, even if his enemies and two-faced kin kept their distance thanks to his stunts, this wasn't deceit, right? Truth is, he really was fragile and in need of a wife to look after him. Spinning one lie demands 100 more. After marriage, little accidents seemed to happen whenever they went out. He'd run into old friends, or sudden events would pop up. With his image to protect, he had a growing list of enemies. After a scandal at a party, Jasmine started to doubt Richard's honesty. He wanted to come clean, but Ken and his actors had already crafted a cover story. Richard's courage once again crumbled. He never expected Jasmine's ex to keep snooping around, trying to expose him. Lucky for him, his acting skills pulled him through once more. What a liar I am, Richard mused, though Jasmine standing up for him was another thing. Shameless, yes, but hey, he still had his wife. Richard's deceptive romance was bound to be bumpy. He managed to ditch Tim, but then someone named Vivian showed up out of nowhere. He didn't remember meeting her often, yet here she was, stirring the pot. Richard felt irritation just looking at her, and whispered grumpily to Ken, "Why is she crashing my love life?" "Maybe she's into Jasmine." The butler, patient as ever, urged, "Stay calm, young master. Think big picture." No choice, Richard prepped an illustrated PPT overnight to prove his innocence. Too bad Vivian was back on his doorstep the next day, spouting nonsense. Taking a deep breath, Richard resisted the urge to shatter his image. But when she mentioned a rose brooch, nope, time to take action. He swung his cane, finally sending the woman packing. But then, Jasmine confronted him. "Explain this." Her eyes questioned. His heart sank. Love can make you feel helpless sometimes, especially when chasing after your wife. The inevitable truth hit him like a ton of bricks. The marriage was built on shady tactics. The real him, not so kind, not as mature, more like petty and jealous. Honestly, he really should have just vanished from Jasmine's life. Steve mocked, "See, your wife's gone." He instantly regretted signing those divorce papers. Under the guise of traveling abroad, he actually rented a nearby apartment, staying close and waiting for a chance. He was initially all in for a high-end business plot to snatch back the divorce papers. Then, Jasmine met with an accident. When Ken broke the news, his mind blanked out from worry. He spent countless nights wishing he could take her place. Heard an old-school surgeon was back in town. He needed to track him down. Heart full of worries, Richard opened the door, surprised to see his gorgeous, distraught wife. Hands shook, and the bowl clattered to the floor. Jasmine chuckled softly, nonchalantly stepping off the treadmill. "What? You can fake an injury, but I can't."